spoke to your colleague up there, Rose Mims contacted me, and she was asking if she and I could come up together, if that would suit the desires of the committee.
Let's take you one at a time.
Okay.
You can only speak one at a time anyway.
Okay. Mr. Chairman, my name is Dan Greenburg. I represent the Advance Arkansas Institute. I'd like to say a few words about half of the bill. You know, you've already sort of divided it into two parts, and I want to speak chiefly about the part that requires compulsory government collection and public distribution of the names and addresses of people who get involved in politics. I think some of the questioners have already brought out the fact that sometimes this kind of compulsory disclosure is a bad idea because sometimes it invades on privacy. In general, I think it's a good idea to have disclosure when people are contributing to candidates. The reason you have disclosure rules is because of a concern that those contributions are affecting candidates' behavior. But the disclosure proposal that you have in front of you today has nothing to do with preventing that sort of problem because it doesn't regulate or alter money going to candidates or public officials at all. And when we're insisting that we make private individuals disclose their involvement just because they want to educate the public about issues, I worry that that invades privacy and harms political activity. Representative Tucker spoke a little bit in the previous meeting. He referenced one of the most famous cases in recent Supreme Court history, Citizens United. And if I could, I'd like to read a paragraph about what I would call citizen retaliation from the dissent in that case.
Keep it close to the bill.
Sure. Justice Thomas, in his dissent, talked about what happens when you have a disclosure rule, as you do in California, that's somewhat similar to Representative Tucker's. He said, he was talking about the effect of that disclosure rule about the Proposition 8 election, which was the gay marriage bill. He said, some opponents of Proposition 8 compiled donor disclosure information, and they created websites with maps showing the locations of homes or businesses of Proposition 8 supporters. Many supporters or their customers suffered property damage or threats of physical violence or death as a result. And they cited those incidents in a complaint they filed after the 2008 election. They were trying to invalidate those mandatory disclosure laws. Supporters were counted being told, consider yourself lucky. If I had a gun, I would have gunned you down along with each and every other supporter. Or, quote, we have plans for you and your friends. And if you look at that opinion, Justice Thomas goes on to cite media reports of retaliation against Proposition 8 supporters, such as a director of the California Musical Theater being forced to resign over his contribution to support Proposition 8, a restaurant manager forced to resign amidst protests for a $100 contribution to support Prop 8. And I'm sure all of you are familiar with the case of Brendan Ike, who amidst protest over his 2008 contribution, lost his job in 2014. And what I conclude from that is that people who want to communicate with the public about political ideas are entitled to some degree of privacy. That's part of a great American tradition. As you know, the Federalist Papers were anonymously written by people who valued their privacy. And of course, there's a famous Supreme Court case about 50 or 60 years ago, NAACP versus Alabama. In the 1950s, the Attorney General of Alabama, John Patterson, tried to get the NAACP to stop doing business in the state. He didn't like the fact that they were assisting in Rosa Parks' defense, and one of the weapons the Attorney General used was a request to get the NAACP to disclose very similar information that is the bill before this committee demands, namely the names and addresses of everybody who contributed to the ACLU and paid their membership dues. 4 times the government of Alabama tried to force the NAACP to report its members, and 4 times it got slapped down by the Supreme Court. And I think it's fair to say that that attempt at compulsory reporting was part of an attempt to shut down the NAACP's funding source. And I think it is a little breathtaking to see this bill and the sponsor of this bill making what I take to be very similar arguments that the Attorney General of Alabama made about a century ago about how important it is that we need to have mandatory government collection and distribution of private information of people who get involved in politics. I guess I'd just say there's some data that is collected that government doesn't have any business distributing when private people take action. I mean, I'm reminded of the case of David Van Vliet, who's a civil engineer out in Washington. He famously filed a Freedom of Information Act request because he wanted to know the names of all the strippers who worked in a gentleman's club. And he was asked why he wanted to know all the names of all these strippers. He said he wanted to pray for them. I don't know. I think that's unlikely, but I tend to think that that sort of information, I think it's private in a special way, and I think privacy and contributing to a private group is valuable too. When people are faced with the knowledge their contributions are going to be made public, that's publicly available for journalists, employers, fundraisers, salesmen, nosy neighbors to access. I think it's plausible that many would-be donors will decide not to donate. And I think this proposal chips away at a kind of privacy that we really ought to be protecting. So thank you very much. I apologize for going on so long, and I'd be happy to take any questions.
Questions from the committee for Mr. Greenburg. Representative Bennett, you're recognized for a question.
Well, first of all, just so we don't mislead anyone, Justice Thomas's quote that you read was the dissent or the losing.
Yeah, I thought I said the dissent, and I apologize if I didn't.
Just to clarify that was. In the case of the NAACP funding, were they involved in electioneering?
I don't know the answer to that. They were doing things like helping Rosa Parks in her action
With a legal defense.
Right. I mean, but I think of that as political work in a very important sense.
Rosa Parks wasn't running for office.
That is true.
And the last question I have is, can you tell me how much your organization spends on these type of ads?
I have to think back over the 4 years of our organization. I believe that the answer is 0.
Thank you.
Additional questions for Mr. Greenburg? All right, seeing none, Mr. Greenburg, you're excused.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.